Hi, my name is Muhammad Husnain Akbar. Today I am going to talk about the five main terms comparative definitions in this presentation. So this is a table of contents. The first one is introduction. Today I will be discussing some critical concepts related to colonialism, neo-colonialism and the impacts on indigenous communities, particularly focused on indigenous Australia. Throughout this presentation, we will compare these concepts with other indigenous contexts globally. We will explore key themes such as sovereignty, equity, recognition, and advocacy. The whole presentation is structured around five main terms through the use of particular examples from Australia as well as international indigenous communities for illustrating their relevance and application. I will illustrate the relevance and application using specific examples from Australia and other international indigenous communities. Let's begin with an overview of colonialism. The definition is Wolf 2006 defines settler colonialism as unique form of colonialism characterized through continuous process of acquiring land and systematically eliminating indigenous people. In example 1, in Australia, British colonization and its impact on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. In example 2, international context, Standing Rock protests in the United States where Native American sovereignty was challenged by pipeline construction. Colonialism, as defined by Wolff in 2006, is a unique form of oppression characterized by the continuous acquisition of land and systematic elimination of indigenous populations. This concept is particularly evident in the history of Australia. In Australia, British colonization had devastating effects on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, leading to the loss of land, culture, and lives. Similarly, on an international scale, the Standing Rock protests in the US are a modern example where Native American sovereignty was challenged by the construction of a pipeline. These examples underscore the long-lasting and pervasive effects of colonialism. Sovereignty: The definition is the inherent right of indigenous people to self-governance deriving from Hobbes. In example 1, in Australia, the ongoing treaty negotiations in Australia aimed at recognizing indigenous sovereignty. In example 2, international context, in the United States, the concept of indigenous sovereignty is recognized through the government-to-government relationships between Native American and the federal government. This recognition stems from treaties and legal precedent that affirm the inherent right of Native American tribes to self-governance. Sovereignty refers to the inherent right of indigenous people to self-governance. In Australia, this is reflected in ongoing treaty negotiations aimed at recognizing indigenous sovereignty. The concept of sovereignty is not limited to Australia. In the United States, indigenous sovereignty is acknowledged through government-to-government relationships between Native American tribes and the federal government. This recognition is rooted in treaties and legal precedents that affirm the right of Native American tribes to self-governance. Equity: The definition is equity is defined as the principles of fairness as well justice in distributing resources, opportunities and rights. The specific focus is on managing the system inequalities faced by historically marginalized groups. Morton Robertson 2020 focuses that it's not possible to completely understand equity without focusing on the intersection of gender, race, and colonialism. In example 1, in Australia, the push for equitable access to services and rights for Indigenous Australians, addressing the disparities in health, education, and employment. In example 2, international context, the struggles of Native American women in the US against gender-based violence and the efforts to secure legal protections through advocacy and policy changes. Equity is the principles of fairness and justice in distributing resources, opportunities, and rights. Morton Robertson 2020 emphasized that understanding equity requires considering the intersection of gender, race, and colonialism. In Australia, there is a push for equitable access to services and rights for Indigenous Australians, addressing disparities in health, education, and employment. Internationally, the struggles of Native American women against gender-based violence highlight the ongoing fight for equity through advocacy and policy changes. Recognition. The definition is the recognition is defined as a process used to repair relationships between indigenous and non-indigenous people, identifying past wrongs and working towards a fair and equitable society. Drawing from Schmidt 2019, cultural tourism is discussed as a source of improving recognition. In example one, in Australia, the national apology to the stolen generations and continuous efforts for achieving recognition with the help of education and policy reform. In example two, international context, Canada's Truth and Recognition Commission and its suggestion to redress the legacy of residential schools. Recognition is a process aimed at repairing relationships between indigenous and non-indigenous people by acknowledging past wrongs and working towards a fair and equitable society. In Australia, a significant step towards recognition was the national apology to the stolen generations, accompanied by continuous efforts in education and policy reform. Similarly, Canada's Truth and Recognition Commission provides a framework for addressing the legacy of resident schools and fostering recognition. Comparative analysis, colonialism and sovereignty. In Australia, the land without treaty or compensation is claimed by British. The disagreed for Aboriginal land rights is justified through doctrine of terra nullius, dispossession of land and imposing foreign government structures, forcefully removing Aboriginal children, systematic discrimination with long-lasting impacts, continued struggles for recognition and land rights. In the United States, displacing Native American tribes justified through manifest density, Indian Removal Act of 1830 forced relocation to reservations, tribes hold degrees of self-governance. Comparing Australia and the United States, both nations have a history of land dispossession and imposition of foreign governance structure on indigenous population. In Australia, the British claimed land without treaty or compensation, justifying their action through the doctrine of terra nullius. This led to the dispossession of land and forced removal of Aboriginal children. In the United States, Native American tribes were displaced under the justification of manifest density. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 forced allocation to reservations, leading to systematic discrimination that has lasting impacts. Despite these challenges, tribes in the United States have maintained degree of self-governance. Comparative analysis, new colonialism and development. In Australia, new colonial policies include marginalising with the help of economic and political practices. Resource extraction and development projects usually occur on indigenous lands without proper consultation or advantages. Indigenous resistance consists of advocacy for land rights and self-determination. In other countries, new colonialism becomes obvious with the help of exploitative practices in industries such as mining and agriculture generally on indigenous territories. Inequalities are preserved through external economic interest and lack of meaningful consultation. Resistance consists of legal conflict, international support, and basic movements. In the context of neo-colonialism, and Australia and other countries exist policies that marginalizing indigenous population through economic and political practices. Resources extraction and development projects often occur on indigenous lands without proper consultation or benefits, creating inequalities. Indigenous resistance in Australia includes advocacy for land rights and self-determination, exemplified by the Uluru Statement from the Heart. International resistance often taken the form of legal battles, international sport, and grassroots movements. Working models of advocacy and policy development. The first one is anti-colonial advocacy model. The aim of anti-colonial advocacy is dismantling colonial legacies and empowering indigenous society with the help of a multifaceted approach according to which basic movements and legal support are combined. The second one is post-development advocacy model. The main focus of post-development advocacy model is rebuilding and empowerment of indigenous societies after colonial rule. The focus of this model is role of international sport, education, and culture revival to foster sustainable growth and self-determination. Two primary models of advocacy are discussed in this presentation: the anti-colonial advocacy model and the post-development advocacy model. The anti-colonial advocacy model focusing on dismantling colonial legacies and empowering indigenous society through a multifaceted approach combining grassroots movements and legal support. On the other hand, the post-development advocacy model centers on rebuilding and empowering indigenous communities post-colonial rule, with an emphasis on international sport, education, and culture revival to foster sustainable growth and self-determination. So this is the United States in the colonial era. Yeah. In conclusion, this presentation has highlighted the significance of understanding colonialism and neo-colonialism, particularly in their impacts on indigenous Australia and other indigenous communities worldwide. Addressing these historical and ongoing injustices is crucial for achieving justice and equity. As we look to the future, it is essential that advocacy and policy development in indigenous contexts continues to focus on these goals. So this is our references. Thank you.